Between you and me, I don't think I play nearly enough war games. I mean, besides 40k, X-Wing, Star Wars Legion, Shatterpoint, Moonstone, Relic Blade, Don't Look Back, I have way too much time on my hands, so Age of Sigmar, here I come. I've dabbled in Age of Sigmar before, and that means I've played one singular game, but that one singular game was really fun, so I've kept my eye on Age of Sigmar, and when I saw the Skaven half of the Skaventide box, I saw a bunch of miniatures that I got really excited to paint, and I think I can paint them up really well and really quickly, maybe even in one day. Yesterday, Nick helped me get all the Skaven models built and based and ready for painting. And these Skaven models are wonderful. They are very orky in their vibe, with fun little stuff like the rattling cannon being pushed by little rats, the Hulk-like Rat Ogres, and the rat riding a rat. I mean, who can say no to a rat riding a rat? Hey, look at these little fellas. He's just a little fella doing a little stab. Or a nunchuck rat. These guys are super fun and flavorful. One idea I had to help me out getting these little rats finished quick is adding some fur. I poured on some Elmer's glue onto a playing card and dabbed this onto the rat. Their fur is clumpy on their elbows and legs. Once I got the glue on there, I sprinkled on some flock, then used my airbrush to gently blast the air to get the fur to hang just right. Trying this out on one of the big boy rats, it worked much better on the big boys. They would have longer fur, so it reads better. With the glue still wet, the fur is very delicate, but the air through the airbrush just gently pushes the flock so it hangs down. This stuff will add some lovely texture and keep me from having to carefully paint the fur later. It worked especially well on the horse rat. This guy looks like he's seen better days, and so the ugly flocking fur makes him look even sicklier. That face. This rat has seen some things. I ended up only putting the flock on the big rats. The small rats don't really have much fur showing anyways. I'm about 3 seconds away from getting paint on my Skaven, and there's 2 reasons why I want to get them done so fast. Number 1, I think they're begging for the speed paint treatment. Usually when I speed paint, I paint really fast, but then I add another 10 or 20 or 30 hours just perfecting. But I think these rattos are really gonna benefit from the big decisions that are made when you're on the clock. When you have a deadline, that is when the creative ideas really get unlocked because they have to be. And the second reason is I was really pleasantly surprised flipping through the Spearhead book. This is Combat Patrol, but for Age of Sigmar, but this actually looks like a real game. Like, this looks like Games Workshop actually tried. Combat Patrol, kind of a big old disappointment, but this might actually be fun. And if I can get these rattos all painted up, we'll have 4 Age of Sigmar armies. The Stormcast Eternals, my Sylvaneth, Nick's Cruel Boys, and the Rattos. We could get some Age of Sigmar going. I started my timer and got to painting, giving each rat a blasting of black primer. I always forget with big projects that the little steps get stretched into big steps. Typically, priming a couple dudes takes a few minutes, but 50 dudes? It takes a while. After I laid down my primer coat, I threw some white paint in my airbrush and gave each and every model a Zenithal Prime. I love a Zenithal Prime because it brings out all the little details in a sculpt. It's great to see the model in this grayscale first. It brings out details and ideas that I wouldn't have had just looking at the box art or the gray minis. Alright, everything is primed and zenithaled. I really wanted to put some colors through the airbrush, just get something down on the model, but I know from experience, every time I try to get a little fancy, I get myself into trouble. Zenithal is gonna be a perfect start. I don't know how to paint Skaven, but to learn, I think I'm actually gonna work on these heroes first. Learn how to paint a rat, and then I can take that, simplify it, and apply it to the rest of the gang. This is the Grey Seer rat, the magician, and it might be the loveliest model in the box. For the metal, I want to tarnish brass with tons of verdigris, and seeing how exaggerated all the metal details of the Skaven models are, I think doing the metal in reverse will actually work better. I base coated all the 2B metal bits with turquoise and then dry brushed a brass paint over them. This left that hot blue color in the cracks and hard to reach spots, and I did a lighter dry brushing of a darker brass color. This caught on all the most raised details and gave the metal an overall darker look. On some of the tricky to reach spots, I couldn't dry brush, so I painted these the normal way, with brass paint and then putting the verdigris on top, but I only needed to do this in a few spots. The dry brushing worked out great. Now for his gray cloak. I mixed some occultist cloak and ashen stone to make a cold desaturated gray color, and I put this all over his robes, giving them a few layers of highlighting with a dry brush of some blue-gray. Honestly, I don't use my dry brushes enough. Since I'm going for speed, I forced myself to use them, and I think this dry brushing looks better than I would have done spending a lot longer with brush-on highlights. For his dagger, I tried the same thing I did for the armor, starting with a rusty orange color and then dry brushing on some gunmetal paint. This didn't work as well as on the brass. Warm brass and cold blue has much more contrast than warm orange and gunmetal. After his dagger, I did a few brush-on highlights of an almost white paint to give the cloak a little extra pop, basically just doing edge highlights. Then I threw a brown contrast paint over the wooden chunks of the bell, and for that rat flesh, I used some very watered-down Karabog crimson over his face, hands, and feet. Then on his horns, I put a dark brown on the base and a light brown on the tips and worked as fast as I could, blending the 2 colors together while they were still wet. I did a little dry brushing of tan over the horns and the rat was done. Now to experiment on that base. I really like the Skaventide animation, which shows the Skaven world as a desaturated brown with glowing green light. I watered down some brown and green paint and put this over the base, blending the two colors together. This will take care of the earth. Now for the magical glow. I sprayed neon green through my airbrush on all his magical tokens and gems, and then sprayed this over the swirling energy on the base, letting it spill onto the bell. I brushed this over his eyes to make them look like they were glowing with the same green energy, and highlighted the glowy bits with green, yellow, and white to make them look magical. He took a little bit, but I'm really liking how this rat is looking. Now for the Warlock Engineer. I want to try a little change to my metal recipe, dry brushing the dark brass first and then doing the light brass. This looks better. It gives me a sharper transition between the teal and the metal. Now for his cloak. I want to paint it red, but he's pretty busy, so I chose a speed paint for this. The speed paint is watery, so it'll flow onto the model, giving me an easier time getting this color into all his nooks and crannies. Now for highlighting, and highlighting is tricky to do quickly, but I have an idea. Instead of making a few different shades of bright red, I took a warm white paint and just sketched on some highlights. These look garish when I put them on, but then when I glaze red over top of these spots, the red looks super bright over top and then fades out quickly. A nice and fast 1-2 punch for highlights. And the crunchy look these gives are perfect for the Skaven, who probably don't have silky smooth clothing. For the gun, I tried again with metal, doing a base coat of a brighter orange and then a dry brushing of a darker gunmetal. This worked a little better, but I don't think I've nailed it yet. Now for the wood stock of his gun. I used a dark brown speed paint, and for his Skaven armor, I used rattling grime. A brown-black speed paint that I gave a few swipes of my dry brush with a silver paint to make it look like metal. This guy isn't as magical as the gray Seer. His only special bits is the eye lenses of his telescope, so I picked these out with my neon greens and yellows. This model is also a banger. Seeing them side by side, I'm really excited to paint the rest of the rats. I got the Gray Seer and the Warlock Engineer all painted up in about 3 hours into the project. 1 hour was priming and zenithaling, and then 1 hour for each of these suckers. And speaking of these suckers, I've been staring at these beautiful Skaven hero models, and I want to make an impassioned plea to Games Workshop. G-dubs, let the Age of Sigmar design team at Warhammer 40,000 look at this Gray Seer model. It is breathtaking. The way his cloak and his tail and his horns all just curl into these little magical wispies. I mean, I assume the design prompt for this was magic rat with a stick, and we got this. And I'm thinking in my head, at about the same time on the Warhammer community, we saw Canoness with Jump Pack for the Sisters of Battle, and it's fine, kind of a cool hat, but it is a bog standard sister with a jetpack. Like, how can Rat with a Stick look this cool and a battle nun with a sci-fi jetpack look like that? But anyway, now that I know how to paint some Skaven, I gotta try this out on 40 rats. Having some experience under my belt, I slapped these strategies onto my little clan rats, who are actually not the piddliest units for the Skaven. Those would be the Plague Monks and the Night Runners. These are the Battle Rats, who are still pretty piddly. Hitting all the armor first, this 2-color brass adds even more detail than was already on the models. Then for the weapons, I tried a third recipe for the weapons, going back to my rusty orange color, but this time doing a dry brushing of black paint to get the highest contrast, and then doing a light dry brushing of silver. Just like the armor, I want to make the weapons extra detailed without doing extra effort. For the clothing, I'm going to make them half and half red and green, using some Army Painter speed paints. I mostly put the red on top and the green on the bottoms, but mixing it up here and there to add some variety. Then I did my red highlights the same way I did on the Warlock. I did this a little on the green too, but I found I really didn't need to. The green speed paint was bright enough that there was already plenty of contrast. For the wood, I wasn't completely happy with the contrast paint I used before. I found this red-brown speed paint and I put this over all the wooden bits. This red looks really good next to their red clothing. And speaking of red, I watered down some Karabog Crimson Red Wash and put this all over their exposed rat bits. I decided not to pick out the little fur bits on each rat. I couldn't think of a good way to pick these out quickly, and I don't know if it would look good. I guess all my rats are white laboratory rats. For the banners, I threw my red paint over these and gave them some highlights in preparation for some freehanding. The Skaven aren't the most artistic faction, and that means that their symbol, a triangle, is really easy to paint. I started off with a white circle and then painted on my 3 intersecting lines. I worked in batches of 10 rats, and after 20, I was feeling a little burnt on the little boys, so I reached for another fun thing out of the box. One of my faves, the Warp Lock Jezzails. I love a rat with a gun, and these guys have big guns. I love the idea of these 2 little guys team lifting these long rifles around the battlefield and sniping from far away. The Skaven are cowards. I'm surprised that they don't have more guns. Also, what I love about Age of Sigmar is the lack of powerful guns. This unit of 3 dudes shooting is only 6 shots hitting on 4s, wounding on 3s. It's not a squad wiper, more of a harassment thinning the herd unit. As much as I love 40k, a lot of units are way too powerful, able to wipe whatever squad they're looking at, sometimes multiple squads in a single shooting attack. I'm looking at you, Rogaldorn Battle Tank. On the barrel of the snipers, I tried again to make an interesting metal, using rattling grime with a dry brushing of silver paint. I still don't know if I've cracked the code on rusty weapons, but I'm still trying. These snipers are basically just more clan rats, and after I got these little fellas done, I had quite the horde of rats in front of me. I got 3 warp-locked Jezzails, 20 clan rats, and the 2 on-foot heroes all done. I'm gonna stop at 20 clan rats for now because 20 is all you need for Spearhead, and chances are this Skaven army is gonna have a lot more than just 40 clan rats. And I'm at 9 hours and 16, almost 17 minutes. So that is like 20 minutes a rat, which is pretty good. I'm happy with 20 minutes a rat. And it means since I've only got the Rat Ogres, the Rattling Gun, and the Gnaw Beast on clan rats, this guy, whatever his name is, only got those guys left, 5 rats. So that should only take an hour and a half, right? Right? Just an hour and a half? Hour and a half? Although the rat faction is meant to be squishy, they do bring a fair number of tough stuff to the battle, and one of the biggest rats is the big ol' ogre rats. I think I can knock out a lot of these guys using the airbrush, and even for the stuff I have to do with the brush, I have a lot more room on these big boys. I started by airbrushing a red beige color over all their exposed skin, doing my best to keep this color off of their loincloths and weapons. Then a little light beige from above, focusing on their exposed skin, tumors, and muscles. After that, I carefully sprayed all the static grass with the brown through my airbrush. Then came the dry brushing of white. Probably should have done this before airbrushing on the fur so I didn't accidentally get this color on the static grass, but it worked out in the end. Then came the wash. Just like all my rats, these guys got a wash of very watered down red, making his skin look inflamed. I don't know if these guys are born this way or embiggened by magic, but it looks like their skin could barely keep up. Now he's basically just a normal clan rat. I gave his armor the same brass treatment of teal and threw red paint over his loincloth. It's definitely easier to do these steps on these big rats. For the weapons, I don't know how many tries it's been now, but bright orange with the black dry brushing, then a silver dry brushing worked well. I think because these guys' weapons actually have details, where the clan rat's weapons don't. Now for one of the unique details of the Rat Ogres, their cut/tattoos. I dripped white paint into the cracks, letting it flow, and then airbrushed on a neon green over these spots. On the warp stones, I dry brushed a green to give these stones some edge highlights, and then did a few brush-on highlights of their skin. I also made their eyes glowing green. I might go back and do this to all my rats, I haven't decided yet. But one fun thing I decided to do was to take my sharpest brush and do some little red scratches all over them. These rats are brawlers who wear no armor. They would get some scratches. The Rat Ogres are probably my least favorite thing out of the Skaventide box. I like when rats are just little mischievous fellas, and a Shrek rat didn't really appeal to me much, but now that I have them painted up, I really dig them. And with those done, it is now time for the Rattling Warp Blaster, which by the way, fantastic name. The Rattling Warp Blaster because number 1, it rattles because it's basically a Rube Goldberg machine, but also Rattling Warp Blaster because it's crewed by rats. Genius. For the Gatling gun, it's a very busy model with some of the trickiest, hard to reach spots ever, but I really don't want to do sub-assemblies and I don't think I need to. I started off with the wood, putting on my red-brown speed paint, and then the whole gun is getting the brass treatment. I put some blue and black paint into my teal to darken it, and base coated all the metal. The gun is so big I want some variety in highlights and shadows over the blue verdigris. Then I airbrushed my teal blue over top, letting that dark blue stay in the recesses. Then I had a magical idea. I sprayed white paint over the tips of the barrels and then sprayed my neon green over these spots and some of the holes in the goo tanks. This base coat color scheme reminds me a lot of Nerf guns. And you know what else reminds me of Nerf guns? That's right, our Patreon. Ever wanted to fight your battles in the labyrinthine hallways of a starship, moving your models in tight formation through a maze of corridors, bulkheads, and junctions where retreat is impossible and danger is around every corner? Well, the Eons of Battle Starship Interior is here to make your dream a reality. For the month of July, subscribers to our Patreon will receive the Starship Interior, a set of claustrophobic, dynamic, and modular hallways that are scaled to perfectly suit wargaming miniatures and give you a new way to play. Now that the base coats are done, I need to hide it all under a ton of brass. Dry brushing everything using a few different sizes of dry brushes to get this color everywhere. Once the brass was down, I did a lighter dry brush with my light brass color, and boom, 80% of the model is done. I hit the tubes with some rattling grime just like on the Warlock Jezzails, and I need to do some correcting to the wood. Despite my best efforts, some blue got on there. I dry brushed the wood to highlight the sculpted grain and then re-wash it with my red-brown. I thought the tube was getting lost in a sea of dark colors, so I dripped some white paint into the seam along the side. Then I splashed some neon green over it, like the hose is positively bursting with goo. Then it was time for the rats' cloaks. I used only the green-brown color. I figure that the rats whose whole job is just pushing don't get to wear the fancy red color. Maybe, if they do a really good job of pushing, they can one day become a stab rat. When the cloaks were finished, the neon green paint had dried, so I dry brushed these spots with black paint to bring back some of the details of the stitching. Then for the pilot, I broke out the royal red color. I don't know what a rat has to do to get to be the pilot of the big gun, but it must be something epic. Or maybe he's the mad scientist who invented the rattling goo gun. The Rattling Warp Blaster is now done, and I am sitting pretty at 13 hours and 47 minutes of painting. Not too shabby, considering I only have one model left, if you don't count those clan rats. And I don't. This guy is the Clawlord on Gnawbeast. Not as good a name as the Rattling Warp Blaster. It's a little bit silly. Can I think of something better? I feel like he should be called like the Vermin Lord on the Great Shriek. Or something like that. I don't know, I'm really tired. But I got just a little bit more gas in the tank, and so I'm gonna paint this guy. The Clawlord is the only thing I have in sub-assemblies. Sort of. He clips in really neatly onto his mount with a very unfortunately placed peg right between his legs. But this will make it much easier to knock out his horse rat. I am an expert now at painting big ugly rats. I gave him the old dark beige, light beige treatment, and to make him stand out differently from the other rat ogres, I sprayed his fur with gray and then with a white paint, like he's a white laboratory rat. Then I gave his skin a red wash, giving it a few brush highlights with a light tan paint, especially on his face and tail. He has some glowy bits as well, some Skaven symbols and a few warpstones seemingly shoved into his side. Is he powered by warpstone? I sprayed a little neon green onto these spots on his eyes, picking them out with white paint. Another thought I had, seeing his skin almost done, a very subtle blue wash would make his skin look even more sickly. And while that was drying, I finished up the warpstones with the dry brushing of green. Now for his collar, and you guessed it, tealy brass. I wish there was a unit that was just a pack of these guys, because he painted up quick and he looks great. Now for the Lord of Vermin. I started with a spear because I already have neon green paint in my airbrush, and then I dry brushed it with a mid-tone green and then a dark green. Then I moved on to his armor. He's the leader, so he needs the most red. After a base coat of teal, I dry brushed a dark red over his armor, and then a dry brushing of bright red. This looks okay. I don't know why this combo looks so good on naked brass, but it doesn't feel light on brass painted red. I gave his very long cloak a coat of the same green I used on the clan rats, and once that was dry, I stuck him onto his rat pony, so I don't have to hold him by his tiny horn. Now that he's much easier to hold, I picked out his exposed rat skin with a little light beige and then got to highlighting his cloak, doing the same scratchy highlights and then glazing over these areas with a light green. I like the cloak, but I feel like his red armor still isn't right. I glazed on more bright red and then I picked out his eyes with neon green, so he matches his rat friend. And the king of the rats is done. Now all that's left to do is to base everybody. I mixed up some watery brown and watery green paint and I put this onto the bases randomly, making each base 50% brown and 50% green. I wasn't sold on my popsicle stick decorations, but seeing them with some color on them, I liked them a lot. I dry brushed a sickly green on everything, which looked especially good on the wood, and then sprayed some neon green from the side, like some warpstone was glowing nearby on every base. Nice and simple and very Skaven. After some black base rims, I got some new models to play with. Boom! Oh, I always forget how long it takes to base rim models, but 16 hours, 46 minutes, 22 seconds, Skaven army complete. I'm gonna go to bed, I'm gonna read the rules for Spearhead, I'm gonna try these suckers out. Fresh off a good night's sleep and 2 games of Age of Sigmar's Spearhead. Oh, I'm loving the rats. I am loving the rats a lot. In my first game against Nick, I lost, but just by a little bit. And then in my second game, I won. I was playing against Sean and my rats beat Sean. Who knew that I needed a Skaven army to beat Sean? But now that I've played them, the MVP was definitely the Rat Ogres, but also I have completely fallen in love with the Rat Ogres. Like the thing I liked least in the Skaventide box has now become my favorite thing. I want more Rat Ogres, and speaking of wanting more rats, let me know in the comments below, Age of Sigmar players and Skaven players, what are the must-buy Skaven units for 4th edition? Because I'm feeling the call of the rats. And I also have a Sylvaneth army for Age of Sigmar, so anybody out there with some Sylvaneth experience, leave that in the comments below too. Thanks for watching.